What Trump just did is in the Bible. Iran and Venezuela. Two nations, two continents, two separate crises, and one president issuing warnings to both, in the same season, in the same tone, with the same unmistakable message. One is in the Middle East, the epicenter of biblical prophecy. The other is in South America, thousands of miles from Jerusalem, seemingly disconnected from anything prophetic. Why these two nations? Why now? Why at the same time? What if this isn't about politics at all? What if this is about positioning? Let's start with Iran. What Trump just did to Iran. Picture this moment. I need you to understand the context before we examine what Trump actually did. Because the context is what makes this action so significant prophetically. Iran is already under unprecedented pressure. Their economy isn't just struggling, it's in freefall. The Iranian rial has lost nearly 40% of its value. Inflation has made basic goods unaffordable for ordinary citizens. Shopkeepers in Tehran's Grand Bazaar, the merchants who have kept the Iranian economy moving for generations, closed their stalls and walked into the streets in protest. And it didn't stop there. Within days, protests erupted in 27 different cities across Iran. Students joined, truckers joined, bus drivers, factory workers. This wasn't one group with one grievance. This was a nation fracturing from the inside out. But here's what made the regime's situation even more desperate. And this connects directly to what Trump did. And it's going to become essential when we examine the birth pang pattern and see how all of this fits together. Iran had just emerged from a 12-day military confrontation with Israel. Iranian forces and proxies had been hit hard. The regime that projects strength throughout the Middle East was suddenly looking vulnerable, both externally on the battlefield and internally in the streets. The regime was cornered, pressured from outside, crumbling from within. And that's when President Trump issued a warning that sent shockwaves around the world. Just before 3 a.m. Eastern Time, while most of America was asleep, Trump posted a direct message to Iran's leadership. And the language was unlike anything we typically see in diplomatic communications. If Iran shoots and violently kills peaceful protesters, the United States of America will come to their rescue. We are locked and loaded and ready to go. Locked and loaded. I need you to understand what those words mean, because this is going to become absolutely crucial when we examine the prophetic significance of this moment, and it connects directly to what we'll see Trump do to Venezuela. This isn't diplomatic language. Diplomats don't say locked and loaded. State Department officials don't threaten military intervention over Twitter in the middle of the night. Carefully worded policy statements leave room for interpretation, for negotiation, for face-saving retreats. But locked and loaded leaves no room. It's military language. It means weapons are ready, forces are positioned, the trigger is prepared to be pulled. And Trump directed this language at the nation explicitly named in Ezekiel's end times prophecy. But here's what makes this even more significant. And this connects to what we just examined about Iran's biblical identity, and it's going to become even more important when we examine the birth pang patterns. This wasn't an isolated statement. This was part of a posture. Think about what the Trump administration has already done to Iran. They withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal. They reimposed crippling sanctions. Iran didn't back down. Iran's Secretary of the National Security Council fired back with a counter-threat that raised the temperature even higher. Trump should know that American interference in this internal issue is equivalent to chaos across the entire region and the destruction of American interests. Chaos across the entire region. destruction of American interests. Think about what Iran is threatening. Not just retaliation against military targets, regional chaos, the destabilization of the entire Middle East, attacks on American interests wherever they can be found. This is escalation, not de-escalation. This is doubling down, not backing down. And here's what makes this exchange so prophetically significant. Because this connects to everything we've examined about Persia's role in Scripture, and it's going to become absolutely crucial when we see how Venezuela fits into this picture. This is pressure at a prophetic fault line. Think about the timing. The Middle East is already volatile. Israel has already engaged in direct conflict with Iranian forces. The Abraham Accords have realigned regional alliances. Saudi Arabia and Israel are closer than ever. The entire region is pressurizing. Nations are choosing sides. And in the middle of all of this, the most powerful nation on earth issues a direct military threat to the nation explicitly named in Ezekiel's end times prophecy. The nation that will be part of the coalition against Israel in the last days. The nation that is already aligned with Russia, another key player in Ezekiel 38, all positioned against the Jewish state. That nation is now being directly confronted by the world's dominant military power. But here's what I need you to see, and this is going to become absolutely essential when we examine why this moment feels different, and it connects to the snare Jesus warned about in Scene 9. This isn't invasion. Not yet. There are no American troops crossing into Iranian territory, no missiles flying between Washington and Tehran in full-scale war. But it's also not peace. It's something in between. Something that builds pressure without releasing it. Something that draws lines and dares the other side to cross them. Something that ratchets tension higher and higher without triggering the explosion. Yet. And that in-between state, that's exactly what Jesus described. Wars and rumors of wars. We're in the rumor phase, the threat phase, the phase where everyone can feel that something is coming, but nothing has fully erupted yet. But here's what makes this particular rumor phase so significant. And this connects to what we'll examine about the birth pang pattern. And it becomes absolutely essential when we see the same pattern applied to Venezuela. The rumors are getting louder. The threats are getting more direct. The pressure is getting more intense. Locked and loaded isn't a whisper. It's a shout. And Iran's counter-threat of chaos across the entire region isn't a diplomatic hedge. It's a promise of escalation. The space between rumor and war is shrinking. But here's what most people miss about this moment, and this is going to become crucial when we examine the prophetic pattern the prophets saw. Trump isn't just confronting Iran in isolation. At the same time, he's pressuring Iran militarily. He's applying economic pressure to Iran's allies and partners, including Venezuela, which means the squeeze isn't happening on one front. It's happening on multiple fronts simultaneously. But before we can understand Venezuela's role, we need to establish the biblical framework that makes sense of all of this. Because what we're seeing isn't random confrontation. It fits a pattern Jesus described 2,000 years ago. And that pattern is going to become absolutely essential for understanding everything that follows. Here's something most people don't realize. Iran isn't just a modern nation with modern conflicts. Iran has a biblical identity that stretches back thousands of years. And that identity has never left Scripture. The nation we call Iran today was known in the ancient world as Persia. And Persia appears throughout the Bible, not as a minor footnote, but as a major player in God's prophetic narrative. In the book of Daniel, Persia is the empire that conquers Babylon. The handwriting on the wall that Daniel interprets? It announces the transfer of power to the Medes and Persians. Daniel himself serves in the Persian government under Cyrus and Darius. But here's what makes Persia's biblical role so significant. And this connects directly to what we'll examine about Iran's position in end-times prophecy. Persia is explicitly named in Ezekiel 38. Ezekiel 38:5 lists the nations that will come against Israel in the last days as part of a massive coalition led by Gog from the land of Magog, and right there, in black and white, is Persia. This isn't speculation. This isn't symbolic interpretation. Persia is named, by name, as part of the end-times coalition that moves against Israel. But here's what I need you to understand, and this is going to become essential when we examine the birth pang framework in Scene 3, and it explains why the timing of current events matters so much. Ezekiel 38 hasn't been fulfilled yet. The invasion Ezekiel describes, the coalition of nations moving against Israel from the north, hasn't happened. The conditions aren't fully in place. We're not there yet. But here's what's sobering about Iran's current trajectory. And this connects to what Trump just did. Prophecy doesn't start with invasion. Prophecy starts with positioning. Think about what has to happen before Ezekiel 38 can be fulfilled. Nations have to align. Alliances have to form. Iran has to be in a position militarily, politically, ideologically, where joining a coalition against Israel makes sense. And look at where Iran is right now. They're aligned with Russia. They're hostile to Israel. They've funded proxies throughout the Middle East. Hezbollah, Hamas, militias in Iraq and Syria, all positioned against the Jewish state. Their leadership regularly calls for Israel's destruction. Iran is moving along the trajectory that leads to Ezekiel 38, not fulfilling it today, but positioning for it, aligning toward it, moving in the direction the prophet described. And here's what makes this so important, because this connects directly to the pressure Trump just applied. Before we go any further, I need to establish something important, because what I'm about to show you about Venezuela is going to raise questions, and I want to make sure we're building on a solid biblical foundation, one that will become essential when we examine the pattern the prophet saw in Scene 7. What's happening with Iran and Venezuela is not the fulfillment of specific prophecy. Let me be very clear about that. Ezekiel 38 hasn't happened. The tribulation hasn't started. We're not in the final 7 years. I'm not claiming that Trump's actions fulfill any specific prophetic text. But here's what I am saying, and this is anchored directly in Scripture. Matthew 24:6-8. And ye shall hear of wars, and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there shall be famines, and pestilences, and earthquakes, in divers places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. The beginning of sorrows. In the original Greek, that phrase is Odin, birth pangs, labor pains. Jesus is describing a pattern, not a single event, but a process. Contractions that start slow and spaced out, but gradually increase in frequency and intensity until they become unavoidable. And here's what makes the birth pang framework so important for understanding what's happening right now. And this connects directly to what we'll examine about Venezuela in Scenes 5 and 6. And it becomes absolutely crucial when we see why everything is converging in Scene 8. Birth pangs don't announce the exact moment of delivery. They announce that the process has started. A woman in labor doesn't know precisely when the baby will arrive after the first contraction, but she knows something has begun that will only intensify until delivery comes. That's what Jesus is describing about the end times. Wars, rumors of wars, nations rising against nations, famines, earthquakes, pestilences, all of it increasing in frequency and intensity, all of it building toward something. And here's the key insight, because this is going to become crucial when we see Iran and Venezuela together, and it explains why the simultaneous timing matters so much. The contractions aren't new, the spacing is what's changed. We've seen Middle East tensions before. We've seen economic pressure on hostile nations before. We've seen American presidents issue warnings before. But we haven't seen everything stacking simultaneously like this. Iran pressured, Venezuela pressured, both in the same season, both with the same tone, both while the Middle East sits on the edge of wider conflict. The contractions are coming closer together. But Iran is only half the picture. And here's where things get really interesting. Because the Bible doesn't just focus on the Middle East, and what we're about to examine about Venezuela will reveal a dimension of prophecy most people overlook. Here's something that often gets overlooked in prophetic discussions, and this is going to become essential when we examine what Trump just did to Venezuela, and absolutely critical when we see how it connects to the larger pattern in Scene 7. The Bible's prophetic focus is on Israel and the Middle East. That's undeniable. Jerusalem is the center of God's prophetic calendar. The nations immediately surrounding Israel, including Persia, are explicitly named in end times passages. But here's what most people miss. The Bible also shows that nations far from Israel still affect her fate. Think about the economic connections, trade routes, oil, resources, alliances. Nations that have never set foot in the Middle East can still strengthen or weaken Israel's enemies through economic relationships. Revelation 18 describes the fall of Babylon, a system of global commerce that has enriched the merchants of the earth. Kings and traders weep when this system collapses because their wealth was tied to it. But here's what makes this significant for understanding Venezuela. And this connects directly to the pattern we're about to examine. Before nations collapse, their wealth is often stripped. Before military defeat comes economic pressure. And that pattern, economic pressure preceding larger judgment, is exactly what we're seeing applied right now to Iran and to Venezuela. But wait, Venezuela? What does a South American nation have to do with biblical prophecy? Why should we care about a country nowhere near Israel? That's what we need to examine next, because Venezuela's role is more significant than most people realize, and it's going to connect directly to everything we've discussed about Iran. Scene 5. Venezuela, the oil gatekeeper in the Western Hemisphere. Here's why Venezuela matters, and this is going to become absolutely crucial when we see what Trump just did in Scene 6, and essential for understanding the pattern the prophets saw in Scene 7. Venezuela sits on one of the largest proven oil reserves in the entire world. Some estimates put it as the largest. More oil than Saudi Arabia, more than Iran, more than Russia. In a world that still runs on oil, that makes Venezuela enormously strategic. But here's what makes Venezuela's position so significant prophetically. And this connects to the economic warfare pattern we just examined. And it's going to become even more important when we see why this is happening now. The Venezuelan regime has cultivated relationships with Iran. Yes, the same Iran we just discussed. The same Persia named in Ezekiel 38. But here's what's truly significant. And this is going to become essential when we see what Trump just did. and it connects directly to the Revelation 18 themes we examined earlier. Venezuela represents economic leverage in the Western Hemisphere for nations hostile to Israel and her allies. Think about what that means. A nation thousands of miles from Jerusalem, with no direct military threat to Israel, can still strengthen the economic position of Israel's enemies. Oil money flowing to Iran, sanctions relief through back channels, economic partnerships that undermine Western pressure. The biblical principle holds: nations far from Israel still affect her fate. Just as Trump issued warnings to Iran, he's applied pressure to Venezuela. Sanctions, economic restrictions, direct warnings to the regime, pressure that targets the oil wealth Venezuela has used to sustain its government and support its allies. But here's what makes this significant. Is there a biblical pattern for this kind of dual pressure? Does the Bible show us anything about how God confronts nations before larger events unfold? That's what we need to examine next, because the prophets saw something that looks remarkably familiar. Here's what the prophets consistently recorded, and this is going to tie everything we've examined together, and it connects directly to why this is happening. Here's what makes the current moment unlike anything we've seen in recent history. And this connects everything we've examined about Iran and Venezuela to the larger prophetic picture. And it's going to become essential when we examine Jesus' warning about the snare in the next scene. The convergence is unprecedented. Think about what's happening simultaneously. Israel is at the center of global attention. Events are compressing. Decisions are stacking. The space between contractions is shrinking. In the past, these crises might have happened sequentially, one resolved before the next emerged. But now, they're happening simultaneously.